Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Balanced Life with Dr. Jacquie here at Black Star Network. Today, we are continuing our series on faith, family, and fatherhood. This month has been extremely exciting, and we've gotten so much information on how to dive in to loving the men in our lives and then how to deal with some of their shenanigans. Today, we're going to continue our conversation with Reverend Deborah Bell, Reverend Katrina Saunders Smith, and our special guest, Jamarcus of Iron Sharpens Iron. So as we dive in today's conversation, we're going to be looking at faith, family, and fatherhood, the road to rebuilding from rebellion, or maybe from rebellion to rebuilding, depending on how you look at it. Each of us has our own way of trying to figure out where we go next, especially when we talk about the pathway to reentry. Welcome in, family. Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
I am glad that you all are here. I'm telling you, after our conversation on last week's show, I really thought that moving into this part 2 would set the tone, because we talked about a lot of things last week. You know, what does it look like? Who makes up our village? Where do we go from here? And how do we help people reentry into the home or have a reentry process into the home? But I realized as we were talking, you guys, that there is, this rebellious spirit or this rebellious nature that, okay, audience, I'm going to say it. It's in all of us. Accept it. We all have a way sometimes of being stubborn, going our own way, feeling like we know what's best for us, and rightfully so. But oftentimes when we talk about how we move into family life and how we gather together, I want to start with Jamarcus this morning and ask him, that question. Jamarcus, in your work with We Are Stronger Together through Iron Sharpens Iron, when dealing with an individual who is coming home and they are still, they're tough, whether it's men or women, they've got that chip on their shoulder, that edge. How do you work to smooth that out in order to get them prepared for the life of living on the outside?
Great question. So we rely heavily on our lived experience. As I've mentioned, all of my Iron Men in Iron Sharpens Iron are all justice involved. So we've been where the individuals are. We've traveled the same road. We've had the same share of adversities, obstacles that we had to go through. So we lean on our lived experience and relating to them and letting them know that we understand the place that they're in, and then informing them of how we dealt with those challenges ourselves, and that they're very real. Let them know that, for one, it doesn't outcast you. It doesn't make you seem strange, weird. It doesn't make you seem any more alpha than anybody else. And once you can get into that place of accepting what you're dealing with, as somewhat being of a norm, it makes the process a whole lot easier, because when you don't have that space, you tend to alienate yourself.
That's a really good process that I'm hearing you develop for us, because you said the lived experience on the inside is definitely not the same as the experiences that are going to take place on the outside. What are some of the, I'll go with this. Let's start with, what are some of the character traits that a person develops on the inside that you think are usable when they get on the outside? Because you can't just abandon everything, because you learn certain skills, you learn certain traits, you learn how, in some ways, to mature and be a man when incarcerated. But there's also that hard edge side. But what are some of those character traits that men bring out with them that they can say, I can take this with me and put this in my toolkit to use for the outside life?
I think one of the strongest is, ironically, our people skills. Even though we're in an environment where you're taught to kind of mind your own business, stay to yourself, to the point that it alienates a lot of people. You got to understand, like, we go into an environment where we're surrounded by virtually complete strangers. And we learned how to survive. I often tell people, I have a bachelor's degree in general studies. I have a master's degree in pain, but I have a doctorate degree in people. Because I've been surrounded by strangers, and a big part of the survival component inside is learning how to read people and how to read a room. So most guys and women come home and they seem to have lost their voice. And it's not because they lack confidence, it's because they lack lived experience. I dealt with it. When I came home, I was real quiet initially, but not quiet because I didn't know how to function around people. I was quiet because I had been in prison for 26 years, and I didn't want every time I opened my mouth to be talking about prison. But that's all I had to share. That's all I had to add to the conversation. So the people skills, and we often refer to prison as the university, and that's why.
That makes perfect good sense. I want to ask Deborah Bell a question regarding those survival skills, because oftentimes individuals with the lived experience of being just as impacted learn things differently, and then how they apply them when they come out or they're living in the world. Communication, eye to eye contact, being in people's, what do they call it, personal space. All of those types of skill sets are valuable. How do we turn those into good quality skills for moving forward to employment, or being able to integrate seamlessly, if possible, into what the children call IRL, in real life?
That's really a weighted question, because thinking about Jamarcus's situation and others that I've talked with, having been incarcerated from the era of the teenage years into adulthood, creates a situation where that individual either continued to respond and react as a teenager, early stages of adulthood, and may not have adequately secured skills that they can use. So then training would be necessary. But before I go to that, I think we also have to address, and we talked about it a little bit last time, the whole concept of there's trauma that has occurred. Jamarcus mentioned being very quiet, kind of reading the room, trying to understand where he really fit in, trying to understand what communication skills he had to give, how to use those skills, and what things he could talk about. And that takes time. It may also take having someone to mentor and walk with them in this space of preparing and being outside of the environment they have known for most of their lives. So being able to connect with a mentor, a teacher, someone who can assist, a coach, a program that can assist with rebuilding those skills and connecting what they do have to where they are now. So that's a process of a person having to receive some training and some attention, either from family members, again, a program, or a therapist or coach, a mentor, so that they're able to make the transition. I think the significant thing is, especially, they're going to be dealing with anxiety about how that happens. They're going to be dealing with unanswered questions, think the unknown of that. And those things can cause a lot of stress. And stress comes out in so many different ways. So being able to take something as simple as the routine. Okay, let's start there. Let's start to establish a new routine, a routine that fits not necessarily where I've been, but where I am now and where I want to go. I think we can't rush people into this part of it. They have to get there when they're ready for it. Otherwise, we're spinning our wheels trying to guide them into something that they're not necessarily prepared or ready for. So it takes a lot of patience on the individual's part, but also on the support part, whether that's family, whether that's an organization of whatever that may be, that's helping them with the transition. So I want to make sure I'm addressing the issue that you raised here of preparing a person for work, for the next stage of being able to support themselves. That's going to require some retraining.
I like what you said regarding to the retraining, the people getting into a rhythm. I'm going to pause because I want to take a break and then come back with Katrina because I'm curious. Jamarcus, you mentioned before I go to break that you went in at 18.
Correct.
That was your age. I'm curious. So when we come back after the break, let's talk about how much education do the incarcerated take with them through their incarcerated process, how it helps them navigate the waters of being incarcerated, and then how do they build on those skills as they look toward the reentry process. We'll be back in a moment after the break.
Hey y'all, welcome to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network and hosted by myself, Bria Baker, and my good sis, Jamira Burley. We are just two millennial women tackling everything at the intersection of politics, gender, and pop culture.
And we don't just settle for commentary. This is about solution-driven dialogue to get us to the world as it could be and not just as it is.
Watch us on the Black Star Network, so tune in to The Other Side of Change.
Welcome back, everyone. As you can tell, this is a loaded segment, but it's important that we talk about that because many people in our homes, in our families, in our communities, on our jobs have been justice impacted in some shape, form, or fashion. And oftentimes it can be triggering. It can lead to traumatic experiences, but it always leaves, I won't necessarily say a bad taste in our mouth just by being justice impacted, but it does leave us feeling some type of way because as Deb mentioned, as Jamarcus mentioned, we have to think about what does retraining look like? What does the education dynamic and component look like? And Jamarcus and Katrina, come on in for a second because as the last segment, when we were talking about this training and education, it really got me thinking. You go into prison, an incarcerated or jail situation with some level of education, elementary school, middle school, high school, if you were paying attention in high school, and then all of a sudden life starts lifing. You find yourself in a justice impacted way. And there's that dynamic of what are my next steps? How do I use the skills that I've at a young age, 18, move into college or I'm going to say college because of you mentioned the fact that the prison was like a university. I've heard people say they spend a lot of time in the library. You know, some people get their GEDs, some people get their college degrees, some people even get law degrees while they're incarcerated because they're building on knowledge. Katrina, I want to ask you in your work as an educator, some of the things that Jamarcus mentioned, you know, related to what role does school, education, administrators play in this pathway for students who are justice impacted at young ages, starting with the young people who've been to juvenile detention, who spent some time and then get admitted back into school? What does that look like and how do we pave that road? And then we'll build from there.
So for a student coming back for reentry, it can be very difficult. They've been told what time to wake up, what time to eat, to shower. They've been told everything is dictated as to what time they do what. So re-entering a school and having freedom and the ability to move is a different thing for them to handle. We see when they come back, especially at the high school level, their social cues are different. How they relate to their peers can be impaired or delayed. Jamarcus makes a great point. They've been somewhere where others haven't. And so their perspectives are different. And so sometimes they don't speak right away because they are observing the situation and the area they're in before they feel like they can contribute. They feel like people are looking at them differently. And because of those mislived experiences, they feel like they can't offer a lot. And so when a student returns back from being incarcerated or in juvenile detention at school, one of the best strategies is to use a peer mentor and to make sure they have a trusted individual at the school that can help them walk and navigate through that. That is so key for them coming back and feeling like they can contribute and be a part of that climate.
In being a part of that climate, and this can be either for Katrina or Jamarcus. First, Jamarcus, what age group do you start working with?
Juveniles as early as 10 years old.
As early as 10 years old. Okay, so that's a whole nother conversation level. So let's talk about that for a moment, because I know Katrina has worked in the elementary space, middle school space, and high school space. And so I know that here where we are, they're called SROs. These are the officers that are in the school. And so Jamarcus, because these kids are on both sides, they're in school, they've had a justice impacted life, they are young, they're emotional, they're triggered, they're traumatized. First of all, what are some of the things that teachers, administrators, other adults in these young people's spaces can look for once a person has been justice impacted and returns to a school setting? What are some of the things that these counselors and advisors should be looking for so that they can gauge and guide the student properly?
Just how engaged they are. One warning sign would be withdrawal, because what you'll find is a lot of the kids that were in school before, they were very socially active, they were very engaged, very involved, and then when they come back, they tend to withdraw because they alienate themselves. They feel as if they're being judged. They now feel less than. And then, of course, they're dealing with a lot of peer pressure, as all kids are. The difference is once you get involved with the system, your consequences are different now. And so some of it could just be, I don't want to go back anymore. So I'm very cautious with who I associate with, how I move, how I react, how I respond. And for some people, the way their mental processes is the best way to avoid to stay out of the way. That way you don't have to worry about it anymore.
I think that's interesting. In coaching, we talk about towards versus away, where you're always running towards something better and you're trying to steer clear and away from that which can cause you harm. Katrina, when you think about that and the young people that you work with, how are they navigating their reentry? And it's oftentimes difficult staying away from people who got you caught up, or whatever the situation may be, because sometimes they're family, sometimes they're really close friends, they're your bullies. How do we navigate and help our young people establish some foundation and baseline for moving forward in a positive direction?
So I think we start with helping them by listening to them, right? When they re-enter the same school where they left, where they've had interactions and people that may have been a part of what caused them to go away, one of the best things we can do is listen. Listen to them telling you, I don't feel comfortable going back there. I don't feel comfortable hanging out with them. And as the parent or guardian of a child in that situation, finding another avenue, going to the school asking, can that student be placed at another school instead of right back in the school where they came from? We know that we can't move like that. Some of us can and some of us can't, right? But what we can do is advocate for that child and say it'd be better for them to maybe even consider an alternate school. Depending on where you live and what your school district has, there are alternatives. That doesn't mean they have to go to school all day. They might go to school in the morning. They may go to the school in the evening to get the classes they need, to stay away from the people that might be triggers or might try to push them back to where they came from. The other thing I would say, besides active listening, because we listen, but sometimes we don't be active listeners and listen for understanding. So be an active listener. And then I would also say, set that time aside. I think we talked about it last week. Set the time aside as a family dynamics to sit down and have a conversation about what it's going to take. Do some role playing. Play it out. What are you going to do when Johnny rolls up to you and say, man, you know, you still part of this crew. Let's go on and get down. That's over with. Provide that role playing of what should I do in those situations? What am I comfortable doing? What am I comfortable saying? How comfortable am I to walk away? What does that look like? We have to provide them the tools so that when it happens, they know what to do and how to remove themselves from those situations.
That's very interesting. Jamarcus, what role does having a safe haven and advocacy play in young people not returning, to the system or finding themselves, 2 strikes, 3 strikes, and then their lives are over? And I know that's a weighted question, and I know it's heavy for young people because they're young. They don't know enough about life to figure out how to navigate life, but they're thrust into these situations and circumstances. What does that path and that road look like?
Yeah, it's pivotal that they have a safe place and someone that they consider a safe person to talk to, that is consistent in their lives, that they know when they talk, that person listens. Like, that is key. She just stated, listening. And I'd emphasize, listen, listen, listen. I've coined a term that says, if you shut up, you just might learn something. As we know, most of our communication is nonverbal. So if we're really paying attention, not just to the words, but to the actions, if we're listening to our feelings, like, we'll learn so much more about them, and they can pick up when someone is paying attention. But you have to be present, and that comes with consistency. And that's what a lot of the youth are seeking. They're not seeking someone to come into their lives and to, quote unquote, preach to them, and then they never see them again. There has to be consistency in their lives that show that you care, for them to know that you're listening, and then that builds trust. And then once you build the trust, they'll begin to open up because you have become their safe place that they have been seeking.
I like that. When we come back after the break, let's dive into the role that community plays in establishing that baseline and foundation for consistency. We'll be back in a moment after the break.
We begin tonight with the people who are really running the country right now.
Now, Trump is often wrong and misleading about a lot of things, but especially about history.
Donald Trump falling in line with President Elon Musk.
In the wake of the unsettling news that MSNBC has canceled Joy Ann Reid's primetime show, The Readout, Roland Martin and the Black Star Network would like to extend an invitation to all of the fans of Joy Ann Reid's MSNBC show to join us every night to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming on the Black Star Network for news, discussion of the issues that matter to you, and the latest updates on the twice impeached, criminally convicted felon-in-chief Donald Trump and his unprecedented assault on democracy, as well as co-president Elon Musk's takeover of the federal government. The Black Star Network stands with Joy Ann Reid and all folks who understand the power of Black voices in media. We must come together and never forget that information is power. Be sure to watch Roland Martin Unfiltered weeknights, 6 p.m. Eastern at youtube.com/Roland S. Martin, or download the Black Star Network app.
Welcome back, everybody. Community is a very big part of society. It's a big part of our culture, who we are, what we do, from family reunions to barbecues and picnics to play dates and all the things that we enjoy as a community. There's something about culture that has a way of making us forget our troubles and our woes, while at the same time bringing in that sense of unity and then defining as well as redefining how we move our lives forward. let's have a family conversation. Hey, everybody, because, when I think about consistency and, the people that have been in our lives that are like our mainstays, our rocks that we can always go to, I want to start with that. When we talk about that community and consistency, I'm going to start with Katrina. I'm just giving her heads up, y'all. When you think about somebody in your life that was consistent, that you knew could be there and always be there, who was your community consistency, individual or place?
Oh boy, you started with me. Church for me was my community and consistent place. I could always depend on my church family. I mean, I had my regular family that was very supportive, but church was my safe space. It was a place I could go and be quiet. It was a place I could just be free to be myself. And there were always, I would say, older or seasoned saints that always provided that wisdom and guidance and was always there to listen.
I like that. Deborah Bell.
Yeah, when I think about your question, I think about a place of belonging, a place where I felt secure. And I had 3 different girlfriends. I couldn't put them together, but I was always in a good place when I was with either of them. They all listened. They did not judge. They were always giving good advice, whether I wanted the advice or not. But I felt a sense of belonging whenever I was with them. And I think that's very important for reentry.
Absolutely. Jamarcus.
So mine is my college professors. When I got into college and went back to school, that became my safe place. So much so that even after I graduated, I became a clerk in the education department for Ball State University. And, that happened while I was in the prison environment. So that was my first introduction to a safe place while incarcerated. I felt accepted. I felt heard. It felt comfortable and it felt normal to me. It made me feel alive. There was no judgment. And that became my first safe place.
I like what each of you have said. I would say for me, my safe place was long walks in nature. There was something for me just about being outside, collecting myself and my thoughts and sitting with myself. And oddly, even as an adult today, I still sit with myself, for quite a few bits of time. And I ask this question because oftentimes people are looking for an anchor, something to hold on to that will keep them from drowning, keep them, feeling safe when they feel traumatized or triggered. Jamarcus, what role does a mantra or a faith system play in seeking safety and security for those seeking reentry after, moving their lives forward?
It was everything for me. Me establishing a relationship with God was my waking moment, because we, more specifically men, we wear this Superman, we have this Superman complex. We wear that exterior to where we feel like we can handle everything that life has to throw at us. And I used to always find myself, oh, it's all good, I'll figure it out. Until you find yourself in something that you can't figure out. And you have to depend on something bigger than you. And when I was able to get out of my own way and allow God to have his way in my life and to operate through me, then my eyes finally opened up and I began to see life for what it was and began to lean heavily on his guidance, his strength in those moments where I needed to be weak, where I used to always felt like I had to be strong. Now I had moments where I could give those burdens to him and not feel like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders 24/7. So it was big for me.
I like that, because one of the things I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, because sometimes we do put men in that space: priest, protector, provider. You got to be strong, big men, grown men, don't cry, all this, that, and the other. Is finding God, walking with Jesus, considered a sign of weakness when you're incarcerated or as a Black man, or does that really show strength of character and fortitude toward manhood?
So in the environment itself, by many, it is looked at as a sign of weakness, because it seems as if as a man, you can't handle it. So now you're running to something. But what you'll find is that once you are this, I say the safest place in the world is in the will of the Lord. And once you get there, I promise you, you won't care what other people think. You receive a peace that comes with walking with him that I will not trade in for nothing in this world, and I don't care who thinks what about it.
I like that. Deb, let's have that conversation, because immediately when he said that, we've often been told that trying to walk in your faith and having friends that aren't in the faith can be difficult. We always say, stay away from familiar people, places, and things. What does that journey look like, Deb, as you try to grow that sense of community with God and find consistency in him?
Yeah. I think for some, it could even be a lonely place because of the depending on the environment that they're in. If they're at a place where there are others around them that are also walking with Jesus and who have that relationship that they can lean into for support and for guidance, help to understand the scripture. But if that person is not there, finding a place of community for your spiritual growth and maturation is going to be very pivotal, especially for those who come from that background or who were introduced to God in prison, and that was their first encounter. Now that you're out, it's about how do you grow that? And so finding a community of people who can support and stand with you, who can be patient as you walk through this journey of growth and learning is going to be vital. I think that for many people, they start off so strong, whether you're in prison or whether you're meeting Jesus just on the outside or whatever, that energy and that sense of, oh my God, this is great. That's the first inclinations that people generally have, first response. But then it wanes as you are then hit with real life situations that causes those things that you thought you just grabbed onto to become shaky or questionable. So having that support of a body of people, a prayer group, a Bible study group, those can be very important places for you to begin to continue your growth in the faith. The other thing I will say, God has an amazing way of speaking to us individually when we sit down and center ourselves and just focus in on him. Whether that's our prayer and scripture reading time, whether like you, Jacquie, it is walking in nature and observing God's handiwork. God can speak to an individual and lead and guide and order your steps. And it is an amazing process that only he can do. And you recognize it clearly when you experience it. But even if you don't have people, turn to God, listen, expect that he will speak back to you, and know that he will guide because he loves and cares.
I can see the Reverend Katrina Smith over there. He cares for you. So Katrina, when this dialogue is so important for grounding, and faith plays a big part. All this week, and I think last week too, the song in my head has been, I got a seed in the ground. And I'm really processing where God is going with that. But when people are moving forward, family, community, conversation, that unity building, people want to have faith that their person is better, that this I found Jesus in prison is going to stick. how do we nurture that as family and help our loved one who's home, who's found God, stay committed to that journey and that walk? Because filling that void and those gaps, the devil is busy.
So something was said earlier today about consistency and trust. I think maybe a lot of our listeners or people tuning in will reference, maybe growing up, you heard somebody's a Bible thumper. What you don't want to be is a Bible thumper. You know, you need to live your life so that they see the God in you and not be beating them over the head with the Bible about what they need to do. I go back to being an active listener because anyone that accepts Christ, no matter what their circumstances are, there are going to be ups and downs during this time. And if you are a friend, a believer who's coming alongside of them, you are there to support in the good and the bad. They didn't get where they were overnight. And so it's going to take time. It's going to take patience. It's going to take the fruits of the Spirit, the kindness, the love, the peace. So we're going to have to show those fruits of the Spirit to someone who's coming in to walking this life. We also have to give them time to learn. They didn't just show up and all of a sudden now I'm a Christian and I'm ready to praise thee, the Lord, and we jumping on fire every week, every other day. You know, people who answer the phone, hello, I'm blessed and highly favored. Welcome to Bible Central. They need to see the Christ in you. You can speak to that you've been in dark places and dark situations, but yet I trusted him. Even when I couldn't see my way, I trusted him. Even when it looked bleak, I trusted him. He may not come when you want him, but he'll surely show up on time. And so you have to live that in front of them more so than anything else.
I like that. You know, this is one of those conversations where we say, not only talk about it, you have to be about it. When we come back after the break, I want to dive into, because we're closing out Fatherhood Month. We've been celebrating all month of June related to our dad. So your father's home. Now what? We'll be back in a moment after the break.
What's up, y'all? Look, Fanbase is more than a platform. It's a movement to empower creators, offering a unique opportunity for everyday people to invest in Black-owned tech, infrastructure, and help shape the future of social media. Investing in technology is essential for creating long-term wealth and influence in the digital age. The Black community must not only consume tech, we must own it.
Discover how equity crowdfunding can serve as a powerful tool for funding Black businesses, allowing entrepreneurs to raise capital directly through their community through the Jobs Act.
Welcome back, everybody. And as you can see, I hope that we put some things in your toolkit that will get you moving, get you started, get you talking about how to re-engage your loved one who has been justice impacted. Now, we've been talking all month about faith, family, and fatherhood. So daddy's home. Now what? Jamarcus, talk to us about that, because oftentimes when a man re-enters into the home, I have heard this from my clients. You've been gone. You don't run nothing around here. Or what you need to do is go out and get a job and stop telling me what to do with my money. Or, yeah, they're your kids, but I've been raising them since you've been gone. All that attitude, all that hate, all that vitriol just kind of jumps off the table at the person who's found Jesus, who is trying to do better, who has gotten a college degree, got their GED, done whatever while they were inside, but they come home to an environment that is still so uncertain. How do we help refocus not only the male, but also help the home be prepared to let this man lead the best that he can while nurturing and growing and supporting him?
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of patience and understanding on both sides. I often tell, the guys, like, when you come home, like, you have to reestablish your position. And I tell them, we teach people how to treat us based off how we present ourselves, our everyday actions. Like, people are going to be reading us like a book because, one glaring fact of data concerning returning citizens is that the recidivism rate is extremely high. And so this has been inbred in society that when individuals come home from incarceration, that within the first 3 years, like 40-some% of them will return to prison. So nobody is going to want to adjust what has become their norm if you're not going to be there for the long haul. So you have to first establish your credibility and the trust from them to believe that you are there for the long haul. And that's not an overnight process. Like, you're going to have to be patient while they grow to learn to trust that you are going to be there for the long haul, and it's okay to give you the reins as the head of the house. And if you're not patient enough to walk that walk and be understanding of that, you're setting yourself up for failure. If the people receiving you aren't understanding that it's going to take time for you to establish yourself, you're setting yourself up for problems. So we have to be understanding. There has to be patience on both sides of the fence, and for a man, in understanding that even in the concept of, being in a relationship, and I'm going to take it all the way to the extreme of being married, understanding that a woman submits to her man when he is being directed by God. So she's not submitting to Jamarcus, she's submitting to the God in me. But it takes time for a person to get to that place to where they can understand and see that God is directing your steps, and it is okay to submit and follow you. Up until that point, you're going to meet resistance. Unfortunately, that's one of the consequences that our actions have put us in this kind of a position. And so we got to deal with it and stay true to who we are. And that's how you teach people how to treat you. And then eventually they'll come along for the ride.
I can hear our audience already, Jamarcus, and preach Jamarcus, because literally, as you were talking about that, one of my questions I was going to say, there's a real thin line between something you said, reestablishing your position versus asserting your manhood. Those are not the same thing. How do we help people understand that it's not even a gray area? It may even be just a thin line in the sand, because there's a tone of voice and some attitude that comes along with the difference between reestablishing your position in the home versus asserting your manhood. Can you break that down for us just a little bit?
Yeah, asserting your manhood and trying to demand something is totally different. And that's why I say, like, we teach people how to treat us. I remember when I came home, my relationship with God was the strongest that it had ever been in my life. And I knew and understood that the enemy was going to be at work and trying to throw me off course when I came home. And the church that my, at that time, fiance was going to wasn't feeding my spirit. So I wasn't getting what I needed from that church. And I remember going to her and expressing this. She was very active in the church, but because of the nature of the question and the conversation, us being engaged and knowing, that not only did me bringing this conversation to the table feed her, but her response also fed me, because she knows that if God is not the head of his life and the head of our home, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. So she assisted in putting me in the best position, and we went and found a new home church that was conducive to feeding us both. So that's when I say we teach people how to treat us. Like, what is your value system? What things are important to you? What are you focused on? Are you making individual selfish moves, or are you making moves that are collective to the unit, the family in whole? Those type of things make a difference. Like when you, just because you're coming back and you're a man and you're trying to assert, you are going to meet so much resistance. But when it's shown and they can feel that this is about building the unit and putting ourselves in the best position to succeed and keeping God as the head, you'll find that you won't meet a lot of resistance. God will open those doors and put you in places where you need to be.
You segment me right on into where I want to go next with either Deborah or Katrina related to that, because we're talking about daddy's home, now what? Husband's home, now what? That woman, ladies, how do we help her get ready? I mean, we haven't touched that subject too much, in a sense that, you know, where does she need to be spiritually, mentally, emotionally, as far as prepared and engaged, in order to receive the man into the house and set the tone for the children and anybody else that's living there, for this to be an amenable or amicable situation? I'm gonna let either one of y'all jump in.
I guess Deborah didn't move first, so I guess I'll go. I think one of the best things for that woman is to find a support group. As the date gets closer, find a support group, whether it's through your church, in your community. Find a support group of women that have gone through this, that you can have those conversations about taking a step back and being open to what's about to happen. I also would suggest, if you don't have a therapist, you might need a therapist. If you don't have a coach, you might need a coach, because you're going to need someone to support you. Because, as has been said, you've been doing it. You've been the woman, you the boss, you bad. You've been holding it down, and now he's back. And so how do you let go and step back to let him lead when you've had to lead? And that can be difficult for us. We're nurturers by nature, but we have to also then be able to support the person that's coming back and give that person the opportunity to lead.
Absolutely. Deb.
Yeah, I think Katrina is right on with that. There may be so many unrealistic expectations about the father, daddy's home, but daddy coming home, and being able to talk with someone who's gone through this process so that you understand the kinds of things that you're facing. And then you're able to talk with somebody about different ways to respond in situations. I'm from a family of very strong Black women. And so we know how to take over a thing and just make it do what it do. But when you're considering the head of household, as some people structure it, or you're considering your man coming back into the equation, there has to be a sense of, as Katrina say, openness, being able to sit down and talk about what's needed, giving him time to adjust, sharing what has been happening, and then talking about what do you both want for the future. I think that those things become very important. Jacquie, you mentioned preparing the children, sitting down with the kids and talking to them about this walk that you guys are about to take, bringing as daddy is coming back home, and what that may look like for them and how they can be supportive. And even including them in conversations once daddy is home, and helping them to see how they've been able to help and offer other suggestions for how they can help. And that can be kind of tenuous depending on the age of the children. because teenagers, they're all about themselves. And so, and then sometimes children will think they're at fault with something that has happened. And so having to deal with those things, again, is, I'll reiterate what Katrina said, a therapist, a coach may be necessary to walk through some of those things that could be minefields. But just being open and having a sense of support for you as the wife, the woman, to know what you're about to face.
Absolutely. So before we close out this segment, there is a line in a song that I just love, and I'm going to ask each of you to think about it and then say your thing. So it is a charge to keep and a God to glorify. If we had to share with our audience and those going through this process, what is something you would say that they should keep and why? Jamarcus.
Keep God close to your heart and let him light your path, and victory shall be yours.
Amen. Katrina.
I would say keep the faith. And my why is because he may not come when you want him, but he always is on time.
All right now, Deb.
Mine would be keep your sense of humor, because this is a weighty situation. But if you're not taking yourself too seriously and keeping all of the things that Jamarcus and Katrina mentioned, keep your sense of humor so that you can have places where there's lightness in the home, and where you can laugh about things that happen. Keep your sense of humor.
I love each of those. When we come back after the break, I'll give my reflection.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. The window to invest in Fanbase is closing. We've raised over $10.6 million of our $17 million goal. That means there's room for less than 6,370 people to invest in Fanbase for the average amount. The minimum to invest in Fanbase right now is $399. That makes you an owner in Fanbase today. Go to startengine.com/fanbase to invest. Why? Because current social apps have taken advantage of users for far too long, with content suppression, shadow banning, harmful racist content, and no real tools for monetization and equity. Fanbase has over 1.4 million users and counting, allowing anyone to reach all their following and monetize their content from day one. Social media is the new TV, and whoever owns the apps that distribute that content have the opportunity to own potential billion-dollar companies. While big platforms with uncertain futures are failing to serve their users, Fanbase is stepping up to fill the gap. Don't wait until it's too late. Invest now, invest for yourself and your future. Go to startengine.com/fanbase and own the next generation of social media.
Welcome back, everybody. And as you can tell, this subject matter, as Deb said, can be weighty. And sometimes we need levity. We need to laugh. We need to love on each other. We need to reminisce about the things that were good, while at the same time discovering how to heal as we move our lives forward. I pray that this month, as we've talked about faith, family, and fatherhood, has brought you a little bit closer to not only loving God, but loving the men in your life, the women in your lives, the people in your life who have been justice impacted. And sometimes being justice impacted is not only about being incarcerated. You can be justice impacted by a traffic stop. You can be justice impacted by walking through the mall. You can be justice impacted just while being Black in America. This is the time that we are facing, but I know that we will all continue to discover, to put things in our toolkit to live a better and balanced life. Thank y'all for watching. Bye now.